It is barely light, and you are pulling a mask down over your face, and the whole world goes strange and narrow and stinking of dried flowers. The mask is a bird's head, a long, curved beak blank round glass eyes, the whole thing carved and stitched from waxed leather, and packed up inside that beak, right under your nose, is a fistful of herbs and camphor and a sponge soaked in vinegar, so that every breath you take is sweet and sharp and faintly rotten all at once. Over your body you are pulling a long waxed overcoat that reaches your ankles, and gloves, and a wide black hat, and into your hand someone is pressing a long wooden cane. And through those two circles of glass, you are looking out at a narrow street where the doors are marked with painted crosses, and where a bell is tolling somewhere, slow, and where there is almost no one left to hear it. You have seen this figure your whole life. On posters, at Halloween, in every painting of the plague, the sinister beaked doctor, gliding through the dead streets like something out of a nightmare. And here you are, inside it, the cane in your hand, about to walk toward the houses that everyone else in this town is running away from. And I am here to tell you before you take a single step that you would not last a week. Not one. And almost everything you think you know about the creature you have just become, the mask, the plague, the whole grim story is either late or wrong or so much stranger and sadder than the costume lets on. So pull the beak straight, take the cane, and let me walk you through the worst week of your life. My name's Marcus, and I should introduce myself, because I'm the sort of man who owns a homemade plague mask and is far too pleased about it. I used to teach history to teenagers who mostly wanted to be anywhere else, and when the textbook let me down, which was constantly, I took up the strangest hobby a grown man can have, which is going out on weekends and actually living the past. The cold, the fire, the bad food, the no plumbing, the itchy wool, all of it on purpose. My wife, B, has watched me do genuinely baffling things in the name of history. She has opinions about the mask, and of all the figures I've crawled inside, this one is my favorite to argue about because people are so sure they know him, and they're wrong in almost every particular. The beaked plague doctor is treated like a monster, a piece of gothic horror, a villain in a costume, and the truth is so much stranger and, honestly, so much more human than that. This wasn't a torturer. This was, more often than not, a frightened second-rate physician in a homemade hazmat suit built on a completely wrong idea, doing a job nobody sane would take, in a world with no cure and no hope. And you, with your soft hands, your clean water, your deep unspoken certainty that you'd have been the clever one, you would have been dead or broken or run away before the week was out. Let me prove it. First, we have to kill the fantasy because you smuggled one in behind those glass eyes whether you meant to or not. You've got the picture in your head. The Black Death, medieval Europe, the great mortality of 1347, a third of a continent dead and gliding through it all, the beaked doctor, that eerie silhouette, present from the very beginning like the Grim Reaper's own physician. It is a magnificent image. It is also, and I want to be very precise about this, historically a bit of a mess. Because here is the first thing that stops my students cold. That iconic mask, the beak, the whole bird-headed costume you're wearing right now, almost certainly did not exist during the Black Death at all. The classic design is usually dated to around 1619 and commonly credited to a French physician named Charles de Lorme, a doctor who served King Louis XIII. 1619. That is nearly 300 years after the Black Death you're picturing. 3 centuries. The gap between that mask and the medieval plague is wider than the gap between us and the American Revolution. So how does a 17th century French invention end up glued in our imagination to a 14th century catastrophe? Because, and this is the part people forget, the plague did not come once and leave. It came back, again and again and again, for centuries. Wave after wave rolled across Europe long after the Black Death, in cities, in port towns, in whole regions, generation after generation, right into the 16 and 1700s. The Beak doctor belongs to those later outbreaks, the ones with printing presses and record-keeping, and yes, a fashion-conscious court physician designing protective gear. We smeared him backward across 300 years onto the most famous plague of all, and now he lives there in the wrong century forever. That's the war we're actually going to live in today, not the tidy medieval one from the textbook. A recurring nightmare that kept coming back to the same terrified towns for hundreds of years, and the strange bird-like men those towns hired to walk into it. So let's start with the honest question. Who were you before you pulled that beak over your face? Who actually became a plague doctor? Not, for the most part, the finest physicians of the age. Think about it from their side for a second. Plague arrives in your city. If you are a successful, established doctor with money and reputation and a choice, what do? You leave. You take your family and your fee-paying patients and you get out to the countryside and you wait for it to pass, because staying is very likely a death sentence and you know it. The good doctors, the ones with options, often fled. That is not me being cruel to them. It is simply what the records suggest happened over and over. So who's left to treat a city of the dying? Frequently, the ones without those options. The young, the unproven, the second-rate, the desperate, the ones who couldn't get a comfortable practice any other way. And so towns and cities did something that honestly has a very modern flavor to it. They hired a plague doctor on contract, a public appointment. The city would pay a man from public funds to stay and to treat the sick, rich and poor alike when everyone else had run. Sometimes he was quarantined himself, kept apart because he moved among the infected all day. He was, in effect, a municipal employee of death, a public servant hired precisely because he was expendable, and because the job was so appalling that the town had to pay someone to do what no one would do for free. So no, you didn't put on that mask because you were the hero of the story, the brilliant healer riding to the rescue. You put it on, most likely, because you were the doctor a frightened city could get. That is the man you are this week. Hold on to him. Now let's look at what you're wearing, because this is where the whole thing turns from horror movie into something almost touching. Every single piece of that terrifying costume is there for a reason. A wrong reason, but an earnest, thought-through, do-my-best reason. This isn't a Halloween outfit. This is somebody's honest attempt at protective equipment, 400 years before we understood a single thing about how the disease actually spread. Start with the great question at the center of it all. Why the beak? Why stuff a bird's face full of flowers? Because of an idea called the miasma theory, and to walk this week you have to believe it, so let me put you inside it. In this world, nobody knows about germs. Nobody has ever seen a bacterium. There will be no such thing for centuries. So when people look for the cause of a sickness that empties whole streets, the most reasonable thing in the world, given what they can observe, is the air, the bad air. Disease, they believe, travels in foul, corrupt, stinking air, miasma, and where the air smells of rot and death and sewage, that is where the sickness breeds and spreads. It is wrong. But look at a plague street full of the unburied and the sick and the filth, and tell me it isn't a reasonable guess. The worst smells and the worst death really did sit in the same places. They just had the cause and the effect tangled together. And if bad smells carry disease, then the defense is obvious. Good smells. Sweet, strong, powerful scents to hold the corruption at bay. And so you pack the long beak of your mask with aromatics, dried flowers, herbs, camphor, sometimes a sponge soaked in vinegar, sometimes thuriac, that famous medical paste, a whole perfumed pharmacy, sitting between the foul air of the street and your own lungs. Every breath comes to you filtered through a fistful of flowers. You genuinely believe those herbs are the thing keeping death out of your body. The beak isn't there to frighten anyone. The beak is a snorkel full of potpourri, and you are betting your life on it. Now the rest. The long overcoat, the gloves, the wide-brimmed hat, often waxed, coated, made from treated leather. Why? Same logic. To keep the bad air, the miasma, from touching and clinging to your skin. A smooth, sealed, greased outer shell so the corruption slides off you. The glass eyepieces let you see while keeping even your eyes covered. And in your hand, that long wooden cane, and this is the detail I love, because it is the most human thing in the whole costume. The cane is so that you can examine a patient, point, prod, lift a blanket, turn a limb without ever touching them with your hands. You can direct people, keep the desperate and the dying at arm's length, move a body all from a distance, all through a stick. It looks sinister. It looks like cruelty, like a man too disgusted to touch the sick. But think about what it actually is. It is a no-contact examination tool. It is social distancing carved out of wood 400 years early. So that's you kitted out, masked, waxed, gloved, snorkeling through flowers, prodding the dying with a stick. Now here comes the hard part, the part that curdles the whole thing. Because now you actually have to treat them, and you have nothing. You have absolutely nothing that works. Let me be plain, because this is the beating black heart of the job. There is no cure. There is no antibiotic. That's the 20th century, centuries away. There is no understanding of what the disease even is. So what does the plague doctor actually do at the bedside, day after day? He does the medicine of his age, and the medicine of his age is, by our standards, useless where it isn't actively harmful. You would bleed them. Bloodletting was the great cure-all of the era, the belief that illness was an imbalance in the body's humors, and that opening a vein and drawing off blood could rebalance it. So you take blood from a person already burning with fever, already fighting for their life, and you weaken them further. You might lance the buboes, those grotesque, agonizing swellings, cutting or cauterizing them in the hope of draining the poison out. You might apply leeches. You might dose them with thuriac, that prized paste of dozens of ingredients, honey and herbs and old ground-up odds and ends, trusted as an antidote to almost anything and effective against almost nothing. You would purge them. You would burn sweet-smelling fires and fumigate the room to drive off the bad air. And none of it touches the disease. On a good day, your treatments do nothing. On a bad day, they make a dying person's last hours worse. That is the quiet horror under the mask that the costume completely hides. You have walked bravely into the house everyone else fled, wearing your careful homemade armor, and once you are at the bedside, you can do essentially nothing but bleed a frightened person and watch. Now I can feel some of you getting ready to doubt me, and good, you should, because this stuff gets mangled constantly online, and I would rather you trust the boring true version than a punchy false one. So let me tell you where the anchors are. The mask itself. The classic beak design is traditionally attributed to Charles de Lorme, a physician to the French King Louis XIII, around the year 1619. That's the name and the rough date to hang it on, a 17th century court doctor, not a medieval one. The idea behind the whole costume, the reason for every piece of it, is the miasma theory, disease as bad air, which was the mainstream medical understanding for a very long time and which, though wrong, was a genuine, reasoned attempt to explain what people saw. And the thing itself, the plague, we did not truly know what it was until astonishingly recently. The bacterium responsible, Yersinia pestis, was identified in 1894 by a scientist named Alexander Yersin during an outbreak in Hong Kong. Sit with that date for a moment. 1894. Human beings had been dying of this thing in wave after wave for the better part of 1,000 years and more, and we did not know what actually caused it until barely over a century ago. Every plague doctor who ever pulled on that beak, in every outbreak across all those centuries, did so without the faintest idea of what he was truly facing. He was fighting a shadow. So let me tell you what the shadow actually was, because you need to know your enemy even if the man in the mask never could. The plague is a bacterial disease, and in these outbreaks it mainly wore two faces. The first, the one most people mean, is bubonic plague. It spreads chiefly through the bite of fleas that lived on rats, which lived in enormous numbers alongside people, in the granaries and ships and filthy streets of the age. A flea bites an infected rat, then bites a person, and the bacterium goes with it. And a few days later that person is seized with fever and chills and a deep, aching exhaustion. And then come the buboes, the swollen, blackening lymph nodes in the groin, the armpit, the neck, hard and hideously painful. That darkening of the skin, the dying flesh at the body's extremities going black, is part of where that name, the Black Death, comes from. And there is a second phase, worse than the first. When the infection takes hold in the lungs, it becomes pneumonic plague, and now it doesn't need the flea or the rat at all. Now it spreads person to person, through the air, through coughing, through droplets. And the pneumonic form, without the modern medicine that didn't exist yet, is very nearly always fatal and fast. Now hold that fact up against your costume and against your job. You, the plague doctor, spend your entire day leaning over people who are coughing that death straight into the air of a small closed room. Your careful mask, your waxed coat, your no-touch cane, they were built to stop bad smells. The actual killer is a bacterium riding on fleas and on the very breath of your patients, and neither you nor anyone alive understands that. You are defending yourself, meticulously, against entirely the wrong thing. And here, right here, is the turn, the thing that flips this whole grim story sideways, and is the reason I can't stop thinking about that ridiculous bird mask. Because I've just told you the costume was built to stop the wrong thing. And that's true. But watch what happens next, because it is one of the great accidents in the history of medicine. The waxed, sealed leather coat, built to keep out bad air, a smooth, greased surface is a genuinely awful place for a flea to get a grip and reach your skin. The gloves and the covered body, meant to block miasma, they put a real physical barrier between you and the bites that carry bubonic plague. The mask over your whole face, the beak jammed with herbs, useless as an aromatic filter. But it is still a physical object sitting between your mouth and nose and the coughed-out droplets of a pneumonic patient. And the cane, that sinister stick, the thing that lets you keep your distance and never touch the sick with your bare hands, that is, by pure accident, exactly the right instinct. Do you see it? These men built protective gear on a theory that was flat wrong. And because the gear happened to be a sealed barrier that kept fleas off their skin and droplets off their faces and put distance between them and the dying, it may, incidentally, by sheer dumb luck, have given some of them a little genuine protection. Not because they understood, precisely because they didn't and got lucky in the shape of their own fear. The right armor for entirely the wrong reasons. I find that almost unbearably moving. A frightened man, reasoning as best he can from a mistaken idea, stumbling half-blind into something that actually sometimes helped. I don't want to oversell it, plenty of plague doctors died anyway. The job was still appallingly lethal, and the costume was no reliable shield. But the lesson underneath is one I think about a lot. Sometimes people do the right thing by accident, out of the wrong idea, and it saves them anyway. History is full of that, and it never stops surprising me. But I've been letting you think the plague doctor's job was to heal, and it's time to be honest, because here is the deepest and saddest truth of the whole week, and it's the one the scary mask hides best of all. In a world with no cure, healing was mostly not the job. The job was something else. Think it through. You cannot cure them. Your medicine is useless. So what are you actually for? This man the town is paying to walk the plague streets. Increasingly, what you are for is to witness, to be present, to count. Plague doctors were often, in effect, the record keepers of the catastrophe. The ones who went into the houses to confirm that a person had the plague, to certify the cause of death, to keep the tally of the dying so the town knew how bad it was and where. You were the one who could be sent, because you were already expendable and already exposed into the sealed and the shunned and the abandoned houses, to see what no one else would look at, and to write it down. That is a strange and heavy kind of work. You spend your days unable to save almost anyone, and instead you become the eyes and the ledger of the disaster. You walk toward the thing the entire town is sprinting away from: the marked doors, the emptied streets, the tolling bell, not to fix it because you can't, but so that someone bears witness, so that the dead are counted, so that a record exists. The beaked doctor, the figure we turned into a monster, was in truth often closer to something like the town's designated mourner and clerk, the one human being still willing to enter the room and see. Now let me keep the promise I make every single time, because getting it right matters to me more than a good story. When I hand you a tidy date, 1619 for the mask, 1894 for the bacterium, hold the specifics a little loosely at the edges. The plague doctor and his costume varied from city to city and century to century. The famous Beak design is the one that stuck in the imagination, not a strict uniform everyone wore everywhere. Some of what floats around about plague doctors online is exaggerated or made up, and I've tried hard here to give you the load-bearing true things and to flag the shaky ones. The mask is later than the Black Death. The theory behind it was wrong. The protection it gave was partly accidental, and the deepest work was witness, not cure. Those are the beams I'd trust. The decorative details take with a pinch of salt or a fistful of camphor. So let's be honest about where you specifically would break this week. And notice that almost none of it is dramatic. It starts with the sheer, grinding dread of it, walking morning after morning into the exact places every instinct in your body is screaming at you to flee. The marked doors, the bell, the silence of a street where the living are hiding and the dead are behind the walls. It goes on with the helplessness, the bedsides where you bleed a terrified stranger and know, behind your glass eyes, that you are doing nothing, that the thing will take them whatever you do, and that all your careful armor and all your flowers cannot change it. And it presses in with the fear for yourself, because pneumonic plague is in the air of every room you enter, and your protection is a wrong theory that only accidentally, unreliably helps. You would be exhausted and frightened and useless, and surrounded every hour by more death than you have ever seen or ever will. You would not last a week, and I mean it precisely and not as an insult. Not because you're weak, because you're modern. You have been shaped every hour of your life by antibiotics and germ theory, and the deep, unexamined certainty that a sickness has a cause you can name and a cure you can reach. And this world was built out of the exact opposite of all of that. A killer no one could see, a theory that was wrong, a medicine that didn't work, and a job that asked you not to win, but simply to walk in and witness and keep the count. You've pulled the beak over your face, filled your lungs with flowers against a poison that isn't in the air, prodded the dying with a stick because you dare not touch them, bled a frightened stranger to no purpose, and walked out into a street where the only sound is a bell and the doors are all marked with crosses. And that's day one. You're already dead. All right, not literally, not on the first day most likely. The costume might even by luck buy you a little while. But the version of you that pulled on that mask, certain you'd be the clever one, the one who'd see through the superstition and save people, that version is already gone, dissolved somewhere between the vinegar sponge and the tolling bell. And now you'd have to do the whole thing again tomorrow, and the day after, walking each morning toward everything the rest of the world runs from. And here's where I turn all of it around on you, because I didn't shut you inside that beak just to make you grateful for penicillin, though you should be tonight deeply. Whenever I sit with this story, the thing that stays with me isn't the mask, as strange and striking as it is. It's the walking toward. Picture it one more time. A whole town is fleeing the rich in their carriages, the doctors with options, everyone with anywhere else to be, and moving the other way upstream against all of them into the marked houses and the shut rooms and the coughing dark, goes one lonely, ridiculous, bird-like figure with a stick and a face full of flowers, who cannot cure a single soul and who goes in anyway. To see, to count, to be the one who didn't look away. And that's the uncomfortable mirror I want to hold up to you, on your side of 400 years and a working pharmacy. We look at that figure and we see a monster, because the mask is frightening and the century is far away. But strip the costume off and ask the real question. Could you do it? Could you walk every single morning toward the thing everyone you know is running from for money out of duty, because the town hired you and no one else would go, knowing full well you have no power to save them, and that the only thing you can actually offer is to be present, and to bear witness, and to make sure the dead are counted? Because that, stripped of the beak, is the job, not villainy, not magic, just the almost unbearable courage of the ordinary person who agrees to be the one who goes in. So that's my question, and I do read the comments, so tell me honestly. Knowing the real job now, no cure, a wrong theory for Armour, a stick instead of a touch, and a week of walking into the houses everyone else abandoned just to witness and to count, could you have put on that mask and gone out? Not the horror movie villain. This one. The frightened, decent, useless, brave one. Tell me below. And be kind to each other down there. We're all a lot softer than the man in the beak, and we all owe more than we think to the people, then and now, who agree to walk toward what the rest of us flee. I'll be off to explain to my nephew Cody why the mask I built is, and I quote him, the coolest and also the most disgusting thing in the garage. We are going to have a conversation about vinegar sponges. And if shutting you inside that beak for half an hour made you look at your antibiotics and your doctor and your soft, safe, wonderfully long little life a bit differently, and if you want me to drop you into another world where you also, let's be honest, would not last, then subscribe and come back, because I have always got somewhere worse to take you. My name's Marcus. Mind the beak, and be nice to your medicine cabinet and your boring, precious old age tonight. You've no idea how good you've got it.